You're listening to the best of Perry Gauthier, where we remember our friend and leader who was taken from us in this life in December of 2020. It is our hope that his memory lives on in the hundreds and thousands of people who he touched both in and outside of capitals in this country and around the world. We will be sharing interviews that Perry did for radio and television throughout the following weeks. Perry was always prepared to share the good news of Christ and God's love for politicians and people serving in the political realm. Today, Pastor Perry is making the message of Romans chapter 13, verses 3 through 4 abundantly clear and giving us some illustrations from his time serving in the Nebraska State Capitol as to why one of the main roles of government is to moralize society.
Romans 13:3, Paul says this, "For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil behavior." Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. Touching on the next episode, verse 4 goes on to say, "If you do what is evil, be afraid, because government is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath." Well, wrath is one of those danger words, kind of be afraid of wrath. It's a very fierce word. So I've entitled this podcast, Be Afraid, Be Very Afraid, because one way the fear of God is to be manifest on planet Earth is when people do evil things, they should be afraid, not only of God who's in heaven, who's coming again, who will judge them, and once they drop in the grave, there is judgment to come, for men are appointed once to die, and after this comes the judgment, it says in the book of Hebrews. But as God mediates his reign on earth through 5 institutions, one of them being civil government, government is to manifest the avenging wrath of God. We'll get into that more next time. But let me read the verse again. Paul tells the Roman Christians that civil rulers are not a cause of fear if they're doing good stuff, but for evil behavior. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and government will praise you. Do you remember in an earlier podcast where Martin Luther King Jr. said, well, law might not be able to change the heart, but it sure can punish behavior. It can't make my neighbor love me, but it can keep him from lynching me. So you're going to go out and lynch people? Are you going to go out and riot? Are you going to break store windows? Are you going to burn stuff down? Are you going to rob a grocery store? Are you going to do evil things? Are you going to rape? Are you going to murder? Well, be afraid. Be very afraid, because God's desire for planet Earth is that it be a place of peace. Even in the Christmas message, let there be peace on earth, goodwill toward men with whom God is pleased. Well, God's pleased when men do well, but God's wrath and punishment is to come even on earth. It's not all solved in the future. Government exists to help punish evil and promote the good. Again, in our verse, Paul says, for rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil, and you should do what is good so that you're not afraid. Well, good and evil, Nate, we call that morality. Good and evil, that's morality. And that's why we said in previous podcasts that the role of government is to moralize the culture. When people in the culture do evil, especially great evil, especially criminal evil, the government is to step in and punish. And that should cause fear. That should cause a fear in the heart. The old saying, that'll put the fear of God in you. Well, that is what we're talking about, because there is a God, and all human beings know. Even the professing atheist. The fool says in his heart there is no God, but he really knows there is. He's programmed with that chip deep inside him. So if he wants to kind of like ignore it, he can try. But we all know there is a God and there's a day of reckoning. And we all know the basics. The moral code of the 10 Commandments is written on the human heart, even for people who've never seen a Bible, people who never will see a Bible. The code of the basic ethic of the God who exists is in the heart. So this does and should produce fear. And let me close with this. Fear is a deterrent. Ministering in the state capitol and hearing debate, for example, on death penalty through the years, on and off, back and forth. One of the things that bothers me is to hear a statement by a senator who means well but is not thinking clearly when they say, now, fear is not a deterrent. Punishment is not a deterrent. And I sit in the balcony as a minister with my Bible in my hand and my heart, and I slap my forehead and I say, oh my goodness, are you kidding me? Fear and punishment are not deterrents? I beg to differ. Let me read it again, Romans 13:3. Rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but they're a cause of fear for evil behavior. So the Lord has spoken. This is clear. This is true. Fear is a deterrent. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
His messages continue to stay relevant and will, as long as that battle between good and evil plays out on planet Earth. We're overjoyed to give you the last installment of the Epic Times interview next week. We can't wait to share it with you.